there is no one sitting in that caucus or cabinet saying, gosh, boss, I'm a little uncomfortable. That isn't the way we used to do it in the old days under Mr. Trudeau.
Pierre 2.0, welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today, we've got a couple panels here talking about Pierre Poilievre, what he needs to change, what he shouldn't be changing, going into Parliament here. Pierre 2.0 is coming out. This is a different Pierre Poilievre, one that has gone through the ringer, one that has lost his seat, got his seat back. Now he's going to go toe-to-toe with Mark Carney. Mark Carney's only stood up against Andrew Scheer so far. So this is going to be a different look in the House of Commons. I don't think Mark Carney's ready for this. We've also got Carney Liberals spending $500 million on more ridiculous foreign aid, as well as the French government has just collapsed, among some other things. Let's jump into this. Starting this one off, we got this from Abacus Data, some new polling data here on temporary foreign worker program. It says position on temporary foreign workers program, strongly support 22%, somewhat support 22%. As you can see, the oppose is 30%, so 44 to 30. This needs to be broken down and very specific, because I think most Canadians support having people come in that we really need, like doctors and engineers and nurses and construction workers. But we don't want floods of low education, low-skilled people taking Canadian jobs. There's a big difference here. The system worked great years ago, and then it's slowly been sliding into the deep end where it shouldn't be. They got to break this apart into have more specific questions to get better results on this poll. Got this one from Blacklock's reporter. Elections Canada says more than 43,000 mail-in ballots went unaccounted in the 2025 election as they were received after the 6 p.m. deadline, although many were likely submitted well before it. So the thing to learn from this is don't mail in your ballot. Go do it in person. If you have to do it early, then go do it early, because 43,000 ballots could have changed some of the riding. In other news, we've got police investigating a third pew-pew discharge at Vaughan Homes in 24 hours. That's right, third incident of pew-pews being used in this one city. Welcome to Canada. On this episode of Far Off Ripoff, got this one here. I thought I'd reboot this series with this one that Table Salt found. Government of Canada has spent $500 million over the past 3 years in South America. We see it here, $500 million in the West Indies, North and Central America, South America. What did they spend $500 million on? Project aims to use the private sector investments in climate change mitigation, adaptation across Latin America and the Caribbean, while promoting gender-sensitive sustainable economic development. It's not a joke when I say gender-sensitive climate farming in Africa, because they literally are doing it. In this case, it's in South America, but this is quite literally how they're spending our money. Project activities include investing in climate-smart agriculture practices. This includes drought-resistant seed variants, irrigation infrastructure, and sustainable land use practices that aim at increased productivity, yada, yada, yada. Scaling up low-carbon and climate-resilient technologies such as energy storage, wastewater management, restoring beaches, dunes, mangroves, etc. Protect the most vulnerable communities from the impacts of climate change. Why? Why are we spending our money to protect communities in South America against the boogeyman when we could be using this to fix problems in Canada? We have way too many problems. This is a ton of money. So when I say the Liberals don't care about Canadians, you bet they don't care about Canadians, because they're sending our money across the world with no audits when our own citizens are sleeping in the streets. Moving over to mainstream media here, we got CTV. They're talking about Pierre Poilievre, his image. First up, we got Tom Mulcair, then Brian Gallant here speaks up, as well as Lisa Raitt.
Valid point. Tom, your thoughts on, you've weighed in on the NDP, but on the Conservatives as well. And I take what Brian and Lisa say certainly about focusing on, and we saw that in that open letter, right? Crime, immigration, cost of living. And I do think that there are sort of vacuums to fill a little bit in particularly crime and maybe even immigration. But at the same time, I'm very curious to see if the way in which that message is conveyed up against Carney is any different than it was up against Trudeau.
Yeah, I do think it's different. And I also think that the very hard edge of Pierre Poilievre is one of the reasons that they came up short during the election campaign. Canadians got to have a good, hard look at him. They'll talk. The Conservatives will say it was the perfect storm. It was the threat from Trump. It was the arrival of Carney, the departure of Trudeau. All that's true. But there's an element that does involve the person and the person delivering the messages, because, as Brian said with a smile, the Liberals aren't shy about borrowing good ideas from other parties, whether it's the NDP on the left or the Conservatives on the right. With regard to that,
Pierre was dominating in the polls until the whole situation with Donald Trump and Trudeau resigning came in. A lot of people did not like Justin Trudeau's theatrics, his juvenile attitude. So once he was out the door, they thought, okay, maybe I can give the Liberals another shot. And Donald Trump came in. The Liberals used that, weaponized that against Canadians with weak minds, used him as the big bad boogeyman, spooked Canadians into voting for Liberals again. They used fear tactics. Pierre Poilievre had an entire platform on hope and building up Canada Canada, and fear is a stronger motivator. That's what happened. The Liberals are great at politics. They're great at manipulating Canadians and getting what they want. They're awful at running the country.
Hard edge. We're noticing it, for example, when he talked about temporary foreign workers. It was pretty well the strongest words that I've ever heard from a party leader in Canada, almost bordering on anti-immigration. I mean, it was a harder edge than you're used to. Now, there's a reason for that as well, because Mr. Poilievre is up against a leadership vote in January. He's got to keep his base happy, and he's got to play that game. But the more he plays hardball, the more he plays that hard edge, the more he's going to push back a lot of average voting Canadians and say, guy's got some good ideas, but there's an edginess to him that I'm just not comfortable with. And so that's the balancing act that the Conservatives are going to have to do. I do think that they've done a masterful job of staying in the news. Poilievre knows that game well. He's very good at social media. He's very good at getting things that are gadgety, getting the letter out there. Everything's a crisis. And again, that's the type of exaggeration that people grow tired of.
That is what Mark Carney says. That's Mark Carney's line. That's not Pierre Poilievre's line. Mark Carney says everything's a crisis. He's now saying everything's ruptured. Fear-mongering Carney is the one here that you're talking about, Tom. It's not Pierre. Pierre points out all the honest stuff that's going on, like the crime, the corruption, the TFW program. All of this needs to be fixed.
And in terms of political communication, the masterclass in Canadian politics continues to be the Conservative Party.
Lisa, what are your thoughts on how, I guess, how, if any, behavioral modification has to happen, essentially, in this parliament versus, let's say, the one with Trudeau?
So I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to jumping off something Tom said. For me, I think the biggest danger is the fact that Prime Minister Carney has really set some expectations out there. I'm going to have a deal by July 1st, then I'm going to do something by August 1. He's not afraid to tell Canadians that he's actually going to do something, not knowing whether or not he can actually do it, because the politics can be really awkward and difficult. The Conservatives don't make that mistake, so they're not going to be making big promises, but they will be there to blame and show where the Prime Minister has said, well, he told you he was going to do this, and he hasn't been able to do it yet. And that, I think, is an open spot for the Conservatives to attack the Liberals without a question.
Does it matter how they attack, though? Like, does there have to be a difference in that? Because I think you don't think that Poilievre has to change his style at all.
No, I don't think so at all. But I think Mark Carney has to be ready for Parliament. It's a different world than being in a boardroom, a lot less civil.
Brian, what do you think about that?
I don't think Pierre needs to change much. I do think with all the ammo we have here, with everything going on in Canada, he needs to get more people attacking the Liberals. It all can't just come from him, because then they'll just paint him as the attack dog. So you really need to have Larry Brock blasting on crime, Michelle Rempel-Garner blasting on the TFW, et cetera, all the way down. So then you're seeing a united front of Conservatives, every single one in their respective area, blasting on that area. I think that's a much stronger position, because then it shows a full team effort. Mark Carney isn't a team. He isn't running it like a team. He doesn't even have a deputy. Francois Philippe Champagne is essentially kind of in that position, but he's not. He's the finance minister, but he's not his deputy. Mark Carney wants this to be the Mark Carney show. His arrogance is showing through. Justin Trudeau, well, he's a dumb man. He knew that he needed someone else to help run things because he's a dumb man. So as long as the agreement was that Trudeau could always go in front of the cameras and just ham it up and have someone else run things in the background and have a deputy to pull up the slack, he was fine with that. Mark Carney, though, too arrogant, doesn't care, doesn't want anyone else there. It's all about him.
My humble opinion would be that I think Poilievre was a very effective leader of the opposition. Obviously, Tom Mulcair would be one of the more effective leader of the oppositions we've seen. Poilievre was very different styles, of course.
If Tom Mulcair was more effective, then he would have become prime minister. He wasn't very effective. He's out the door now. He's no longer the leader. He's not a part of the party anymore. He did his thing, but I mean, let's just look at the numbers, man. Tom Mulcair's support nowhere near Poilievre's.
Very effective. I'm not 100% sure, though, that he really took the airtime that he had, given Trudeau at the time was having such a rough go, to let people know who he was and what he was about and what his priorities were and what kind of values he would focus on. List goes on. I think it was all about Trudeau. It was all about the government, and he did that very well. But when you're the leader of the opposition and you are going to be the leader of your party in the campaign, there's a balancing act. I would suggest that he would most likely have to start to do a bit better on that balancing act. He started to do it near the halfway point of the campaign. I listened to a podcast, it was a kind of a random one that I landed on, and I thought he was really good. He was just telling, I didn't necessarily agree with everything, but he was telling these stories and background on why these policies were important to him, and he just came across, to use Tom's word, not as edgy as he may have been the sort of year before. So more of that would be my humble suggestion to them if they were looking to try to have that balancing act be a little bit better.
Okay.
That's an interesting take from this liberal here, Brian Gallant. I think the podcast he's talking about is the one out of CH something or other in Vancouver Island. I think it was that podcast. There was one there where Pierre was getting more into the background of why he was choosing to do things and just more personal. And so I actually agree with his take here. Pierre needs to do more podcasts or more shows or more something that shows people who he is, because he has been the leader of the opposition attacking Trudeau the whole time, but people don't get to know Pierre. And especially with a lot of the female vote, women in general will feel more comfortable with someone if they know who they are. And if they don't know who Pierre is, aside from seeing Anna on stage and his kids for a couple weeks at the beginning of the campaign, they just won't feel as comfortable. Mark Carney came with a history that painted a story of who he was. Governor of the Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of England, Goldman Sachs, yada, yada. And people are like, oh, okay, so he's a boring banker. That's what we need. Something boring, something simple to clean up Canada. Well, it turns out Mark Carney, not boring. Not in the slightest. Why is nothing getting done right now? Because Mark Carney and his wife are doing mountain trail races, 26 kilometers. Congratulations. That's good for 60 years old. Unfortunately, we actually need a prime minister running Canada right now. With that, we've got Vasi Kapellos here, panel on CTV. There's a mix here, both talking about Pierre Poilievre has to change his image to be successful, and that of Justin Trudeau still holding a lot of weight over the Liberal caucus. And maybe that's why there's this big push to create a environmental caucus and try to push Carney to a more green agenda. It's just funny because they don't need to do that. Mark Carney's whole life revolves around this. He's just trying to separate himself from Trudeau before he pushes it forward any harder.
I wonder from a strategic perspective, just jumping off that point, like a lot of what is being announced, I think is necessary to address the economic crisis we're facing, Scott, but it is at like a macro level. I do feel, again, having been there for cabinet, talking to different people, there is a realization that they need to communicate and show Canadians that what they're doing will actually impact their lives. And I feel as though the opposition and the Conservatives have picked up on that, right? Like they're looking for ways in which they can contrast themselves and be sort of more out for your everyday life or your everyday concerns. How do you anticipate that shakes down in the fall session? How do you anticipate sort of the Liberals and the Conservatives will try and contrast themselves against each other?
Yeah, I think you put your finger on exactly the number one vulnerability that Mark Carney faces, because he is a macroeconomic thinker by definition and by history. That is his experience. That is his strength. That is why he's prime minister today. That's how he got to be in this position. But as the economic challenges continue to pile up, as jobs are shed, as growth stalls, as people start to feel that pinch in their day-to-day lives, he's got to translate that talk to the kitchen table. We know that Pierre Poilievre is good at that. He is sinister good at it. He is lethally good at it. Carney's going to have to find a way to turn the telescope around. He spoke on Friday with these massive suite of macroeconomic policies. Short-term supports, long-term structural incentives for change, but he's got to find a way to take that to the boots and laces crew who are actually working on the line. That's going to be the challenge for him. And if he leaves that space open, Pierre Poilievre will fill it. I just want to add one thing. This debate about
the reason why that's not going to move the needle for the workers is because Carney didn't announce anything for the workers. He pulled back the EV mandate because the auto industry is about to collapse. He was getting pushback from so many industry leaders. He had to do it, or it's the end of his political career. So he had to pull back on that. He's still pushing forward with his net zero agenda. He specifically mentioned it in his press conference. So yeah, workers don't care about that. Workers want to be able to put food on the table and pay their bills and live in a house that doesn't cost $2,700 a month in rent.
It goes to Justin Trudeau hanging around this caucus and cabinet. I think that Mark Carney's attitude toward that can be summed up in two words. Who cares? Come on. New economic realities and a boss who is sharp with his tongue to lash out at people. There is no one sitting in that caucus or cabinet saying, gosh, boss, I'm a little uncomfortable. That isn't the way we used to do it in the old days under Mr. Trudeau. That is over.
Well, but they do.
I think that's in response to this environmental caucus thing. I mean, there's multiple quotes in that article. So does Carney care about what they have to say? No, he doesn't. He's running this like it's a company, and Mr. Boardroom, Mr. Chair doesn't care what anyone else has to say. He's going to run it like Carney's going to run it. But there's clearly pushback from the Liberal caucus. They don't understand his net zero agenda and who Carney is and what he's invested in. So they think that he's abandoning the cause, but he's not. That's what's funny is like these Liberals are turning on each other. Then they don't even know what's going on.
Feel it like they're like I don't disagree that the desire to express it has been clamped down on, but they certainly feel it. But I do know what you mean. Corey, Scott mentioned sort of openings for the Conservatives heading into the fall. What openings do you see for Poilievre in particular, and what potential vulnerabilities do you see?
Well, I think the opportunity is what you guys have already talked about, which is the affordability side, how these tough, challenging times that we're facing are going to impact people. But I think there's also a risk around these major projects that if they stall out, or if there's a lot of criticism around them as they roll out, it creates an opportunity for Poilievre. Carney basically took the Conservative campaign plan and platform and put it in the window and said you can have all of this, but without the jerk in charge. But that only works if you actually get these things done. And if you see major headwinds on the major projects, I think it creates an opportunity for Poilievre to say, look, that was our recipe, and we're going to bake that cake better than these guys can.
So that's it. Mark Carney stole everything, pretending that he's being more conservative because that's what people wanted. They didn't want more of Justin Trudeau policies, net zero, EV mandates, carbon tax. The carbon tax dominated the circuit, so he pretended to be conservative. As Corey mentions here, you can only do that for so long, and Carney knows it. So that's why Carney pulled back on the EV mandate, because it was tanking the auto industry. He's pulling back, but he's just going to go a roundabout way and then bring back all these policies because his entire life is wrapped around this. All of his RRSP investments, as well as many of the other ones, it's all wrapped up in this.
We'll see about that. But the challenge that the Conservatives will have is I think, more personal around Poilievre himself. It's impossible to win an election if you've got a 30-point deficit on the other guy in terms of likability and best prime minister. I think Poilievre needs to soften the tone. I think he needs to have other people in his shadow cabinet out doing the hatchet work of attacking the government, and not be the lead attack dog every day in question period. I think that's part of what's made him so unlikable. And if he continues to be that unlikable going forward, he's going to have a heck of a time ever becoming prime minister.
So I don't necessarily disagree with Corey here, although I don't know what some of the numbers he's stating there. But if we look at Mark Carney first off, we can see here views of Mark Carney, they're plummeting now. He was at 57, now he's down to 51%. So he is dropping. You can see negative is going up. Back at 29, now we're at 41. So Mark Carney's image is going down the drain. But if we go down to the bottom here, favorability of Pierre Poilievre, back in September 2023, 49%. This red line is unfavorable. 49 was the lowest, and now it's gone up to 58. So it is slowly creeping up. So I think some of what Corey said there is right. Pierre's got to hand off some of the attacking, the really nasty stuff, to other Conservatives, because they're not going to be the ones running the show. They can deliver the message. And Pierre's got to be more prime minister in waiting. It doesn't have to be a big switch where he completely changes who he is, but just hand off a bit of the dirtier work to some of the other Conservatives, just so he can get away from this whole attack dog persona. Because the Liberals are going to keep running on that and trying to paint him as a bad guy and attack dog and all this thing. So if he hands that off and just looks like a prime minister, they can't go after him for that anymore. It takes away their power.
Such deja vu to like 2 years ago, and the conversation with the four of us was exactly for Trudeau and Poilievre to stop being their own attack. No, it was to stop being their own attack lads. It was the same advice. They both loved going at each other and ultimately didn't serve anyone too well.
And I don't think characterologically that it's possible for Mr. Poilievre to actually change that about himself. So you can start to see, people like Melissa Lantsman more and Michelle Rempel more in the headlines, like talking more. But frankly, I don't know if Pierre Poilievre, with the negatives he's currently carrying with the water, if he can actually shed that. He's going to have a total personality transplant for that to happen this fall. But he's lucky. Why? New Democrats are in the wilderness, right? They're doing nothing, right? They have a very small caucus. They're in a leadership race. It's going to be hard to punch through and get media attention. The Bloc is going to be distracted by a provincial election that will happen in Quebec next fall, and the lead up to that. And I just actually think that really to change the dynamic differently for Mr. Carney, they'll have to see something change really with Mr. Poilievre's personality, because I don't see his negatives changing. And you heard him this past week on the TFW issue, on other issues, using the same kind of glib statements. And I think that Canadians are largely turned off by that.
This is so disingenuous having Kathleen Monk on here running her mouth like this when her firm is involved in spending millions of dollars attacking Pierre Poilievre. That whole protecting Canada bullcrap, she shouldn't be allowed to be on this panel. Like, why do they bring her on? We've got some breaking news here. The French government has collapsed. As Melissa says, they're now demanding impeachment and resignation of Macron. So this situation, their government over there is a little bit funny, but Macron is the president. His term goes through until 2027, but the prime minister has lost a non-confidence vote by a large margin. Macron will have another prime minister, and he's had a whole bunch already. The government has collapsed again. The people are revolting in the streets. I can't show you the footage, but people in France, they're absolutely revolting everywhere because they want to get rid of this government and get rid of Macron. I wonder if Trudeau's there consoling him right now.
Did today, i.e. overthrow a government, is a victory for the popular mobilization during the summer. In 2 days, we will have a major movement. Tomorrow, we will ask for impeachment of Macron. The problem for the country is Mr. Macron. The day after tomorrow, we will be in the streets to block the country's economy, to say this is enough.
They're going to lock down the country old school style, much like what the French farmers did to try to get rid of Macron. It's all crumbling from the inside out. And to round off this episode, we've got another statue being unveiled here in Brampton, Ontario. Okay, guys. Well, why? No more ugly statues. There it is. Another ugly statue. Canada's becoming a clown show. This needs to be banned. No stupid statues. This has nothing to do with their religion. This is just gaudy and ugly. This is turning into cheap Vegas. That's what this looks like. It's tacky. It's beyond tacky. How does this keep happening? Without distinct identity, Canada will not be Canada anymore.